you, before we get into the politics of all this, this is obviously a concern based on reality and not just in California.
Well, one of the major drivers of how Americans feel about crime relates to gun deaths and shootings. And if you look at what happened in 2019 compared to 2020, gun deaths went up by 30%. Also, over that time frame, mass shootings went up by 60%. So Americans feel a certain way about crime because the crime has been going up in terms of violence. Now, that said, you're not going to see any law enforcement officials or the public crying for defund the police. That's just not going to happen in this current environment. But at the same time, they also know we have issues of bias in policing. And that I've seen too many cases where I have had to cover personally where, black men and brown men are being treated unfairly by police. Police are going to have to deal with both of these issues simultaneously. That's just the bottom line.
And Marianna, you wrote this week that this concern over crime will really haunt Democrats going into November.
Absolutely. Even House Democrats back in 2020, they blamed the losses, those surprise losses, on that progressive chant, defund the police. And Republicans have really capitalized on that and have continued to frame Democrats in that way. So a lot of these, especially more vulnerable Democrats in the House, are spending as much time as possible with law enforcement, making the case, introducing themselves and saying, you know what? I don't actually like defunding the police. Here's what we're trying to do. We're pushing leadership to actually hold votes on such legislation to fund police.
And Mary, President Biden said it himself on Tuesday, showing that voters want candidates who are tough on crime. So how does the administration prepare for this going into the fall, walking that kind of fine line?
I think it is interesting that the president on Wednesday morning made a point of going out of his way to stop on the tarmac to make this point directly to the cameras. And they know, the White House knows this, the president knows this, Democrats know this, that crime is going to be a big issue going into the midterms, and that they have to do a better job of really articulating their stance. The president reminding Americans that he passed billions of dollars for policing in the American Rescue Plan. He says states aren't using that yet. And I think you're going to hear him hammer again and again that he's not for defunding the police, the opposite, that he says fund the police, don't defund them. But I think it does get to a broader challenge here, and Marianna's written about this as well, that it goes beyond just crime, right? This is also an issue of homelessness, about the economy, of inflation. Americans are feeling uneasy.
And I think especially in California.
Especially in California. And the president and Democrats have to do a better job of showing that they're on top of those issues as well.
And Rick, other elections on Tuesday night, what happened? Give us a rundown of what happened Tuesday. I know some non-Trump supported candidates won.
Yeah, you're seeing a real split in the Republican Party and some moderates that are starting to emerge out of these primaries. And Donald Trump was so upset at a bunch of Republicans. He targeted a whole group of them in California, in South Dakota, in Iowa, in New Jersey. And in almost all of those cases, at least this past week, the incumbents or the more electable candidates ended up winning. They went against Trump's wishes on this. And it tells you that for all the talk about Trump's power in the party, and it's real, there are still limits to it. And you're seeing voters go in a different direction. Big test case this coming Tuesday in South Carolina. He's got a target on the back of Nancy Mace and Tom Rice, who we profiled here on the show just last week. And if both of them
talked to him last week.
Yeah, and he's defiant. He said he would vote for impeachment all over again. And if the Trump candidates again strike out there, I think you'll have a bit of a recalibration about what his power means. He is swinging and missing in some very big races.
And meanwhile, let's go towards 2024. You've had this kind of shadow race being reported for the 2024 Republican nomination. You have Pence, Senator Tom Cotton, Rick DeSantis.
Because inflation, the state of the economy, is going to be at the top of voters' minds in November. The White House knows that. They are making a big push on this. And I think you did see a bit of a more aggressive tone from the president this week on this, especially as those brutal gas prices are hitting everyone. And we know his playbook, right? He's going to put Putin in the war in Ukraine for the impact that having prices. He's going to be going after corporate greed a lot, and then also the pandemic and the sort of hangover effects of that. But the president does have a challenge here, right? He has to be empathetic. He has to come out and say he understands the challenges that Americans are facing, showcase that, kitchen table Joe side of him that resonates so well. But he also has to show that he's doing enough here to tackle this so that people feel that he can really make a difference. And he's going to continue to argue that Republicans, he says, they don't have any better answers either. But the bottom line, we know this, it's going to come down to how voters are feeling, what their bank accounts look like, and what their wallets are feeling in November. And the president has got to really at least hope that even if prices are high, that if they're coming down a little bit, the White House hopes that if the trend is heading in the right direction, the voters will reward Democrats for it.
And we'll see about that, Rick, of course. But meanwhile, the New York Times had a piece this weekend headlined, "Should Biden run in 2024? Democratic whispers of no start to rise." And going on to say, as the challenges facing the nation mount and fatigued base voters show low enthusiasm, Democrats in union meetings, the back rooms of Capitol Hill, and party gatherings from coast to coast are quietly worrying about Mr. Biden's leadership, his age, and his capability to take the fight to former President Donald J. Trump another time.
Yeah, that's
not a good headline.
It's not a good headline, but I'll tell you, they're not too concerned about the dynamic for two main reasons. One is the whispers haven't become shouts. People aren't saying it very loudly. And one reason is that there isn't an obvious heir apparent for a lot of Democrats. A lot of people feel like Kamala Harris would be a flawed candidate. So there isn't an obvious someone that could step in. And I think the second main thing is that Joe Biden did beat Donald Trump last time. And if Donald Trump remains a major presence, there's a lot of Democrats who feel like, look, there's really only one guy that's ever beat him, and that's Biden. And the White House view, to Mary's point, is they are going to continue to signal that they get it when it comes to inflation and gas prices, and they think the president's standing is closely tied to how people are living their lives. And if they can show progress, show that he met the moment, show that he gets it, show that he is addressing it, they think the numbers can get enough better that maybe the midterms aren't quite as bad as it looks right now, and that will change perspectives around 2024.
Marianna.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's the thing that Biden, you've seen him change his tone a little bit when talking about inflation. Because at the beginning, a lot of Democrats were saying, hey, look, the economy, it's doing great. It's the best in, record number of years. And people weren't feeling that. People were saying, why are you telling me it's good when all these prices are going up? So also see the messaging a little bit to talk more about and have that empathy, but whether that is a little too late, we're still a couple months away, but it could be a little too late for a lot of these people who are saying, we need help now.
And Pierre, I want to turn to the January 6th investigation, sorry, the hearings. What's the Justice Department looking at here? You heard Adam Schiff talk about he thinks it should be President Trump should be investigated. How hard is the pressure on Merrick Garland, the Attorney General?
Well, the Attorney General is going to be watching as much as he can. That's the guidance we have. We know the prosecutors will be watching. And I think we need to think about two things. Number one, the Justice Department feels like it has proven that there were two conspiracies involving the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, where they planned well in advance to attack the U.S. Capitol. In fact, the Proud Boys had something called the Ministry of Self-Defense. And 2 days before the insurrection, January 4th, they were talking about how they were going to attack the Capitol. Also, they had a written detailed plan about how they were going to occupy buildings in Washington, D.C. The Oath Keepers had amassed an arsenal. So DOJ says we can prove this because we already have 4 people with the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers who have pled guilty, who said, yes, there was a conspiracy, I was a part of it. The key thing they're going to be looking for, Martha, is will the hearings shed any light on whether a convergence between the people who organized the rally and the people who organized the violence.
And Mary, we saw several key members of President Trump's inner circle say they did not believe the election was stolen. You had Bill Barr, you had Ivanka Trump saying that. How significant is that?
I think it's huge, and it's effective for the committee. I mean, for them to be able to say, don't take our word for it, right? Listen to these people who are in Trump's inner circle. They are trying to incriminate the former president with, the words of his own cabinet officials and even his own daughter. And I think it lets the committee get at what is really at the core here, right? Which is the fact that there was no fraud, and they're arguing and showing that those close to the president, probably the president himself, knew that. But they are going to argue that the president ignored the truth, ignored that fact, and went ahead to try and overturn the election anyway, because they are arguing that he wanted to hold on to power no matter what. And it's not just about building a case, I think, against the president, right? It's also, as you and John Carl were talking about earlier, about making a case for Republicans still in office or those running for office who continue to stand by or perpetuate the big lie, like Kevin McCarthy, who still won't say that Biden was legitimately elected. But it's hard when you still have Trump out there, and Trump naming names and throwing his own daughter under the bus.
And Trump saying exactly that. Meanwhile, Donald Trump saying the so-called rush on the Capitol was not caused by me. It was caused by a rigged and stolen election. Ivanka Trump was not involved, and looking at her, studying election results, she had long since checked out and was, in my opinion, only trying to be respectful to Bill Barr and his position as Attorney General. I won't add that last line. So, Rick Klein, I mean, he is going to continue this. This is his rallying cry.
He is making the point about why these hearings are so important. He, in real time, with this commentary, is reminding people of why this is not just something that's happened in the history books. This is something that could happen again. It's a present and future potential threat to democracy. And I think the point about accountability for people who knew better, people that knew that this election wasn't stolen. And that's why Barr and Ivanka are important in this, because they made a calculation. They were very loyal to President Trump, but they said, wait a second, I'm not going there. There's places I won't go. There were members of Congress, there were elected officials, there were many others who would go even further than that. And the point that I think has to happen out of all of this is accountability for them. When Liz Cheney said that there were several Republican members of Congress who asked for pardons in the closing days, that is at least a tacit admission that they knew they were doing something wrong. People knew that this election wasn't stolen, that what they were lying about wasn't just political spin. They were lying about who was the rightfully elected president. That has to be an important takeaway, and I think tomorrow's hearing, establishing that Trump and his circle knew, will be critical in putting that together.
And Pierre, I just want to end with gun reform. You saw those moving interviews. You saw the parents this week from Uvalde talk. It was so heartbreaking. Where does this stand, and is there a chance this can go forward?
Well, clearly Congress is moving toward, the Senate is moving toward some sort of compromise. It won't go as far as many people want. It won't raise the age limit to buy assault weapons from 18 to 21. But the conversation about red flag laws in terms of improving them, catching people before when they're showing these signs of being unstable, that is critical. And talking to law enforcement, they just want something, any kind of incremental increase to help keep guns out of the hands of people that would go into a classroom and murder children, they say is needed.
Especially those assault-style weapons. Thank you all for joining us this morning. A great conversation. Coming up, our revealing interview with White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Stay with us.
When safe drivers save up to 30% on their auto insurance for not answering their phone while driving, they feel like a pretty big deal.
Steve, did you get the ice?
Even if they forgot the ice. Save up to 30% on auto insurance with USAA Safe Pilot. Get a quote today.
With Golo, I've lost 13 inches in my waist. They're out of here. You eat normal food. You're not eating diet food.